Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of Talking the Red. This is Wes, and today we are going to continue our discussion of the Eden raid, which dropped this morning for Final Fantasy XIV Shadowbringers. Just as a heads up, this is obviously a spoiler video. If you're wanting to keep the strategies and mechanics kind of hidden, just be aware of that before you continue on. And once again, this video series is really meant for new red mages to kind of get a glance at what you can expect in-game, kind of discuss some individual strategies for these bosses as we go on through. However, if you are a veteran red mage and wish to give your own strategies, make some comments on your individual play styles, by all means, we do welcome them here in the comments. Without any further ado, let's go ahead and get started. We are going to be doing Eden's Gate Descent, which is the second raid for this new wing. So opening up here, we go ahead and get our ready check ready to go. For the most part, these are all just duty finder groups, nothing super fancy. Might take a couple tries. I believe this is actually our second attempt on this boss with this group, but for the most part, they're not too bad. So here we go ahead and get started with our precasting, and I did get pretty lucky with my procs down there. Now this fight is very gimmicky. I can see that this is going to probably be a pretty crazy fight once Savage drops in 2 weeks. So you have that line AoE right there, spawns these guys that kind of run across the edge. But here we're going to take a look at some of his gimmicks here. Now, this fight is really based on timing. He's going to show us a preview of what his main mechanics are here in a second without the stop timer, but essentially he is going to cast something on players and then put a stop on that move. So they have to hold on to whatever happened to them for a few seconds, and it's really up to the rest of the group to kind of keep that in mind, keep order of operations in mind, as well as deal with all of the movement and whatnot throughout this fight. As a red mage, I actually found this one a little bit easier than the first boss, just because with a timer, it's really easy for you to just kind of stay in one area. If you know what the markers are, obviously that's a stack marker. It's really not too bad. It's kind of a combination of a bunch of different mechanics we saw from like Seiryu and whatnot in the last expansion. So here is our first one with the timer. The first timer is relatively short. I think it's like 7 seconds or something like that. But eventually it does go up to about 20 seconds. And it does become very, very important to keep track of, again, the order of operations of everything. So the tricky part with this as a red mage is going to be just the area of movement here. If you are like me and just love using your displacement at every possible opportunity, you can really only do it north-south. There's just not enough room to do it east-west, and I'm kind of noticing that is a very common theme through a lot of the Eden raids so far. There we go. So these guys are going to have a pretty long cast timer here, and then eventually, as you'll notice, they start doubling up, adding a bunch of different things all at the same time. Individually, they're fairly easy mechanics to keep track of. So as you can see, we need to stack. Now the AoE markers went up first, so it's really, really important that they get away. This group is trying it for the first time, so I don't think they realize that. But yeah, they need to get away, and then we come and stack in just a little bit, or those of us that don't have the AoE can go ahead and jump on in. You can go ahead and get into another melee combo there and Scorch, and move into my Verfire. Now these guys have a lot of room-wide AoE, so these are very, very healer-intense fights. I can really see why they had to rework a lot of them through the balance changes. Here we have another line of these guys coming up. I can't remember, I believe we do have another wave coming out. Here we go. So you really kind of have to find your open spot. These guys will disappear before he actually pushes you, so you do have a little bit of leeway. But they do sometimes come at angles, so you have to be very, very careful to make sure that you're not going to get knocked into one that's coming right towards you. Like I was saying, as you can see, it's really not too bad of a fight once you know the gimmick, but really getting that gimmick down can be kind of tricky for new groups. I imagine once Savage comes out that this is just going to be an absolutely crazy raid. I can't imagine what kind of new stuff they're going to throw at you that are going to utilize those mechanics. It seems like just about every expansion the developers find one thing in particular that is kind of their favorite thing to do, and it seems like time stoppage is this one. Between this and the twinning expert dungeon, you see it quite a bit. There we go, some gravity wells we have to stand on, nothing super crazy. But yeah, as you can see, we all have to make sure and stay stacked here. I have had quite a few groups where the person with the marker ends up running out way too early and ends up killing himself, so got to be careful with that. But no, stay stacked. Okay. Well, that's all right. We end up saving the day anyways, so just spoiler alert, we end up beating him. Now, I do end up spending a lot of time in this fight in particular at very, very high mana. It's not something that I really recommend if you can help it, but again, with how much movement is going on in these fights, you're going to be probably finding yourself at some certain portions where you're going to be in the upper 90s. I'm sure once Savage comes out and you have static raid groups, it can really kind of coordinate things a little bit better. Hopefully the red mages, if you are really focused on DPS, you won't have to worry about standing in the puddles and all that. So here you've got the line of sight thing. We have to make sure and look away from him. But again, that will get a timer as well, so I think I do get it a little bit later too. So it's really important for whoever has that, and as you can see I have it at this point, to move way behind the group. Honestly, as a red mage, it's really nice getting that because I'm already going to be back there anyway, and then hopefully the rest of the raid doesn't have to worry about looking at me at any point. There we go. And as you can see, I'm staying at 100 mana for quite a bit. You know, this is a situation where reprise is, you know, something you might be able to use in some situations. I do use my engagement quite a bit in a lot of these Eden fights just because there's not really an easy way to use displacement without ruining my timers on it. You know, reprise is one of those kind of gimmicky moves that's really made. I haven't used it all that much, to be honest, but it is good in situations like that where you're just really full of mana, or you have a ton of movement going on and you can't stop to cast, or you don't have enough time to try and get your melee combo in. Kind of helps you manage your mana a little bit. Engagement I do use quite a bit. Engagement is, instead of displacement, it shares the timer with it. If someone has a big donut AoE, you can go ahead and use your engagement and still get a little bit of that DPS in. It's a little bit lower potency, but as you'll see a little bit later on when we go to Eden's Gate Inundation, you really don't have a whole lot of opportunities during certain portions of it to use your displacement, so you might as well go ahead and use engagement, put it on a cooldown timer, and then hopefully displacement will be back up by the time you can use it again. But yeah, these fights in particular, you're going to notice a lot of very skinny hallways, not a lot of room to move around. A lot of pre-positioning. You know, that's always been pretty important when it comes to Final Fantasy raids, is really kind of memorizing the fight, getting yourself into position well before you need to. But for this series of raids in particular, I'm noticing it is even more important than I remember. There you go, another pushback. But yeah, this is basically the fight. Like I said, once you know the gimmick, it's really not too terribly bad, but it does take a little bit of time to kind of get used to it, and it is a very kind of group-dependent fight. You know, individuals can make it a little bit easier if they know what they're doing, but obviously if people aren't stacking with you, there's nothing you can do with that. You just kind of have to do it over and over and over again until they get the hint. Other fights a little bit later, it is kind of a little bit more individual, performance-based. The first fight, Eden Prime, I think, is very individually based. Aside from the DPS check, it's mostly just individuals dodging things. But here you really do have to coordinate as a group to make sure that you're not messing up your timers, keeping track of your order operations and whatnot. There we go, so we got another hand of Erebos here. Of course, the music is just fantastic. You can find the soundtrack probably online by now, I would guess. But just a huge tribute to Final Fantasy VIII. There we go, Sokka really outdid himself with this expansion. There we go. You can go ahead and use my Embolden there. I think at one point I accidentally switched them up and used my modification before I used my Embolden. It's not going to be a huge DPS loss. Now that they've added Scorch, I've noticed that it's kind of hard to fit in that extra last finisher when you use modification like you used to. But, you know, it never hurts to give it a shot. There you go. And then at some point, I believe our Dragoon does go ahead and use the LB3. It takes off about 2.5% if I remember correctly. But we're pretty much at the final ropes here. All right, I think I get one last finisher in, and that's really about it. Thankfully not a ton of resurrections or anything this fight, but a little bit later, I think on Titan, you're going to see that red mages are still extremely powerful when it comes to raid progression. Those instant reses are very, very, very powerful and extremely helpful. I've even had a couple of times where it has absolutely saved the group over the course of a fight, so you know, you do have to manage your mana with it, but it is absolutely vital. All right, so there is Voidwalker. I hope you guys enjoyed this. Again, if you guys have any particular strategies you wanted to talk about, what works for you, what doesn't work, feel free to leave a comment in the field below. But thanks a ton for watching, and we will continue the rest of the Eden series a little bit later.